Cyber Hornet
What a beautiful sight.
Satoshi shirt on in honor of the Cyber Hornets today.
Well, this interview, this discussion came about because of them. So I guess thanks are in order to the Cyber Hornets and the plebs and the maximalists for pressuring you into doing this.
John, the Cyber Hornets are, I mean, they're out there representing you. Apparently, by the way, the real question is, what is it about you that makes the Cyber Hornets so intensely loyal that they would badger me to death until I came on the show?
I don't, that's a question for the Cyber Hornets, but I suspect it has something to do with the fact that I tend to like to get into the deeper parts of the rabbit hole in my discussions when I talk about Bitcoin. I think the macro stuff and the economic and financial case and the investment case is all very well and good and interesting. But at this point, it seems so obvious to the point of almost boredom. And, I love the guys like Raul and Preston and Lynn and all those, phenomenal people that are doing great work. But I get it. I know what the investment case is, and I've known for a long time. What I'm interested in is what are the implications of having this thing emerge on the world, and what does it mean for society, for individual behavior, for interaction, for the future, and that's I think that's part of it. You'll have to ask them when you interact with them more online and stuff, but I think that's most of it.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. My issue with the macroeconomists and the financiers is sometimes they sugarcoat everything because they're thinking I have to describe it in such a way that somebody else that's less committed, that's less insightful than me will agree with a small portion of my argument, so they'll give me money. And you keep dumbing it down through 3 or 4 or 5 layers, and then there's nothing left. Like, for example, what is Bitcoin to me? It's like fire. It's going to change the civilization. What is Bitcoin to you? Well, it's an uncorrelated asset. And if you put 2% of your portfolio in an uncorrelated asset, you'll have less volatility. And let's back test this for a decade and see whether or not this might be an uncorrelated volatility reducing thing. And I think, man, that's it's like, so what is the word?
So
like
narrow.
Bitcoin deserves better than that. But also I give you fire and you can conquer the world, change the civilization, reroute the course of human history. And you want to call that an uncorrelated asset?
Yeah,
like it's
exactly.
It's a 1%, a 2%. We want people to do a 1% allocation to an uncorrelated asset. And I'm seeing aqueducts and roads and airplanes. And I think, in their defense would be like, we have to talk to the investment advisors in language they understand. But I would disagree. I think it underestimates the strength of human intellect. I think that if you explain to them that this is an engineering breakthrough, and the first time in human history, we have a monetary network that will store and channel energy without power loss. It's like a railroad. It's like mass transit. It's something extraordinary that's going to be an underpinning of civilization. There were investors that invested in Standard Oil, and there were investors that invested in U.S. Steel. In fact, the greatest of financial investors is JP Morgan, and he's the guy that actually put together the merger that created U.S. Steel, when he merged Carnegie's interest with the other steel interest. It's like they got it. And I think that investors will get this too. I don't think you got to dumb it down and say something like it's an uncorrelated asset to decrease the volatility in your investment portfolio.
Yeah, I think that's an extremely narrow way to put it. And like you said, I think people put it in that way because they think they're speaking the language of the people that they're trying to entice into this thing. For some people, and I'm sure we both had a lot of these conversations, if you go in with, this is literally the incorruptible substance that will transform humanity, well, you might lose some people in that way. So to my mind, understanding the macro arguments is good and a good use of time insofar as it allows you to speak the language to get to the real point that you're trying to make. So I talk to a lot of people in that world as well. And if you can make that case, then it's almost like you get to the next level. Nothing, pleases me more than to just jam out at the depths of the rabbit hole. I think that's where the interest in this lies. That's where, to me, Bitcoin is literally stunning. When I think about it, it's almost like it kind of washes away the thoughts in your mind, and you're in awe almost. And then that awe gets pushed into different, lines of thinking that emerge in your mind as a result, and being in that sort of meditative, stunned state. And that's where I like to hang out with the plebs. I like to get the plebs on, whether they're quote unquote well-known Bitcoiners or nobodies, and got on and talk about where they've come to in those explorations. So that's what my interest is. And I've noticed in your tweets lately, and obviously you deal in both worlds as well. And I'm sure you have to speak like the language of the macro stuff so as to not come off too, crazy right off the hop. But in your tweets and stuff, you're coming out with a lot of these great insights that I think has endeared you to the plebs and the maximalists and the cyber hornets for that very reason, because that's the depth and the level that they're at, as the shirt that you're wearing implies. So what has been your experience in straddling those two when you're making the case for Bitcoin to the people in your worlds?
Well, I think everybody resonates with a different set of metaphors, and it also depends on their context. So, for example, if you're meeting with pure institutional investors in a formal institutional context, then there's 6 people watching in a big room, or 6 or 12 or 16 people. Then you would use that very formal language of whatever uncorrelated, synthetic safe haven asset. You could use that, but on the other hand, what I've found in life is you have a very different conversation with 8 people on the team when their boss is there and when the 8 people are sitting next to each other than when you have a one-on-one conversation with them. And the conversation, if the conversation is a formal meeting with a hierarchical set of supervisors, it has to be very constrained. If the conversation was a one-on-one meeting in a business setting between 9 and 5, it would be about here. And if the conversation was a one-on-one meeting outside of business, like, I want to have a heart-to-heart with you, John. It's like, let's go out to dinner. And we have dinner. And of course, that would be a different thing than if I stood up in front of 50 people at church on a Sunday. So you almost have 4 different venues, right? The sermon, the social, the one-on-one professional, and then the formal business meeting. And the metaphors and the semantics you're allowed to use are different. And by the same person sitting in the one formal meeting that would always go to the antiseptic sterile metaphor, if you caught them one-on-one off site, right, they might open up to you and they would have the more spiritual discussion. And sometimes they feel like, well, I can't in front of my boss or my peers. And sometimes they feel like, well, it wouldn't be polite, right? Or it wouldn't be appropriately professional. So even if they believe it, they won't always share it. Can I tell you one really funny story I had in this regard? When we bought Bitcoin corporately, the most challenging environment, a publicly traded company is going to buy Bitcoin on behalf of other public shareholders, right? So everybody's walking on eggshells. What will the shareholders think? And we went to great lengths to treat the shareholders very transparently and respectfully. To the extent that we tendered to buy $250 million worth of our own stock at a premium, so as to give everybody an option to either to opt into MicroStrategy with Bitcoin or to exit at a profit if they didn't like the idea. That's how, when you spend $250 million, in order to cushion the message, it's a lot of commitment, right? But having said that, so we announced the tender offer, and then my finance people said, I said, well, how do the shareholders think about this? They said, well, they're all generally pretty okay with it, but there's this one shareholder, this one investor who doesn't like it. And I said, so, and I'm going to meet with them today, right? They're like, yeah, we've lined up a bunch of meetings. So get ready for this one, because this guy really doesn't like Bitcoin at all. And you should just get ready for that. So I'm like, okay, suit up, go into battle. And the meeting starts and we start talking. And I said, yeah. And so we purchased Bitcoin because we have this macroeconomic view, and we view Bitcoin as a great way to preserve the purchasing power and the treasury of the company. And our alternative is to decapitalize the company completely and give all the money back to the shareholders, but then we won't have any capital. And the guy's like, yeah. And then he goes, so tell me more about this. He said, tell me more about this. I said, well, let me tell you about Bitcoin. I said, Bitcoin, is a decentralized, crypto application on a proof of work network.
Said, I don't need to know all that. I know all that shit already, right?
And he literally cuts me off, and he goes, oh, I already know that. I own Bitcoin.
Right.
And so here's the point. Secretly, privately, he agrees with you. He agrees with me. He's already got it. In his role as a public representative of his investment company, he had to push back.
Yeah.
And so sometimes the same person that believes one thing privately, and by the way, he had to push back reflexively, but then when we had a one-on-one, he's like, I get it. No problem. I'm like, and they're like, well, how did it go? I'm like, oh, it's fine. It's fine. He owns it. Yeah. So by the way, and then in my private meeting with my investment advisors, they're telling me you got to be concerned, but this is a big problem. And you can imagine the ripple, which is like, by the time you go through 7 layers, it was like, oh, there's going to be a big problem if you do this. This is that you got to do this. You can imagine why people act so constrained and conservative in their views when they're being filtered through layers. But if you manage to build a communication channel directly one-on-one, you'll actually generally be pleasantly surprised at the insight of humanity.
Yeah. And I think that point precisely is one of the big takeaways this year. And, it's been talked about a ton, so we don't have to dwell on it too much, but the likes of you, Paul Tudor Jones, and a few others in the space, just kind of de-risking these conversations generally, so that, because before, in some instances, you couldn't even have them, they'd be dismissed outright. And now you can at least have them. Yes, you have to structure them a bit differently. You have to use a certain language. You have to take a certain track, but at least you can have them. And then, as you just articulated, once you peel back the onion a bit, you realize, well, more people are interested in this than it seemed on the surface, right? I had a similar conversation with a friend a couple nights ago. Went out to dinner, and the service was really slow, so it ended up being like a 3-hour wait before it was all said and done. And so we had lots of time to chat, and he was kind of on the side of, capitalism is kind of broken, wealth concentrates too much, we really need to fix the system and stuff. And I kind of took the track of, it's not capitalism that's broken, it's the rails on which capitalism runs that's broken, i.e. the currency. And if we could run it on a different currency, an incorruptible currency, a fair currency like Bitcoin, then we might see some of those problems dissipate. And it may end up being the most optimal way of organizing and coordinating human economic interaction that we have. And we went down all the money rabbit hole and the economics, and we settled on this thing, because he was like, yeah, but what about gold? And I said, well, gold, long history and everything. But I framed it in terms of money is such an important substance. It's the highest concentration of, as you say, energy, our essence, our collective value and productivity, that it attracts, all of our worst attributes as humans, right? So it has to be impervious. It has to be able to repel our malice and our corruption and all those other things, if it's going to continue to serve as what we want it to serve as, that coordinating mechanism. And its properties will dictate how well it is at repelling those things. And I think the story of gold is that it worked worked as well as it could be expected, but not well enough. Its property of, let's say, physicality and centralization meant that it was more susceptible to our corruptive nature. And that's what we did to it. And here we are. And, what I finished with is, What if Bitcoin, and I know we both love Robert Breedlove. I think the recognition that he makes of Bitcoin potentially being that alchemical concept of the incorruptible substance, if it really is that thing, and I know he didn't introduce that term, but he introduced it certainly, I think, to the Bitcoin cyber hornet lexicon. If it really is that thing, then even if there's a 1% chance of it being that thing, isn't it worth your time investigating it? Isn't it worth your time learning enough about it to decide whether or not you should, be engaging it in some capacity? And to my satisfaction, I guess at the end of it, he said, if that's the case, then yeah, it's probably worth looking at.
One idea, I mean, it may be a big idea, is maybe the world would be a better place if the engineers ran the monetary system instead of the politicians ran the monetary system.
Oh shit.
Because on the left hand, you have the domain of politicians, and on the right hand, you have the domain of the engineers. And, like, how would you feel if you had a nuclear power plant and a politician showed up and started telling you how to set up the rods?
Exactly.
Right? Like, nobody would think, they would never consider allowing political interference in most complex engineering systems, because any third grader would say, you don't do that, you're going to have a meltdown, right? You're going to kill us all.
Yeah.
And so in the domain of engineering, engineers submit their decisions to the laws of nature and conservation of energy. And there are rules, and they're not allowed to break them. And if they break them, right, the engineering systems fail. But in the domain of politics, right, there are no rules. And so it's all relative. And Bitcoin represents the singularity where engineering finally impinges upon economics. It's the first engineered monetary system in the history of the world, right? And I think we underestimate the engineering element here in the memes and in the metaphors. People trust engineers. I mean, every time you get on an airplane and you find a 747 halfway around the world, I'm an aeronautical engineer. It's a miracle that you can take off in an airplane in New York and you can land alive in London or Paris. If you had any inkling of all the ways you can die, and inkling of all of the engineering challenges you had to overcome, and if a politician came along and said, we just thought we would take one of the wings off the airplane, or we would add 3 more, right? I mean, no one would think about it. So I think that the magic of Bitcoin is that engineering is arriving to economics for the first time in human history. Mm-hmm. And the challenge of gold, to your point, is number one, it's a corruptible monetary system because it's centralized. And number two, it's not a closed monetary system. It's an open monetary system. I mean, a closed engineering system would have 21 million things in it, and only heat can come in and go out. The mass can't come in and go out. Bitcoin is a closed system because there's 21 million Bitcoins, and you can heat it up, you can cool it down. All closed thermodynamic systems are like that. That's the definition of a closed system. Closed systems are a pretty good idea, right? An open system is when I can put more mass in or take mass out. Open systems have problems. You can't solve for a solution in an open system because of the question of what mass is coming and going. And in gold, right, the openness is I can mine more gold. I don't know how much gold will come and go. And so if I was building a monetary energy network on gold, it's corruptible and it's not closed. If I then I rebuilt the monetary energy network on Bitcoin, and it's closed system, and it's hopefully not corruptible, but certainly a lot less corrupt. It's crypto, resistant to corruption. It's the best anti-corrupt system we could come up with in the history of the world. And I think that's a really important idea to spread for people to start to grasp, because I think you'll win over all the engineers in the world to Bitcoin when they start to understand that somebody engineered a monetary system for the first time in human history. Because if there's anything we all agree on, we kind of generally like our engineering.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think always with a paradigm shift of this scale, or perhaps there's never been one of this scale, but with all paradigm shifts, I think they're difficult to spot. And so sometimes it's a wonder that the people that you would think most likely to spot it early, like the engineers, like the economists, like the gold bugs or whatever. So, this one, it can be so foreign that they miss it. And I think that happened early days in this. I think that's changing now. But do you have people in your life that you can jam out about this stuff with in person? I know you're doing the rounds on the podcast lately and you're on Twitter mixing it up with the plebs, but here you are wearing a Bitcoin shirt. You're fully orange pilled. Do you have people in your life that you can just sit around the fire and talk about this stuff with?
Well, the OG was Eric Weiss, and Eric introduced me to Bitcoin. And so we sit around and talk about it. Eric was in the business many years before. He discovered Bitcoin when I was sure that it was a fad and I couldn't be bothered. And I forgot that I had an opinion, right?
2013 or whatever it was.
So we talk about it a lot more, but I'm making converts, right? Like you know how it is when you get orange pilled. Pretty soon you start spreading that to other people around you. And I've got my requisite friends that I've got the speculators, the guys that buy it and sell it and think it's volatile and they brag about buying it and sell it. And then I've got the ones that were inspired to buy some more and then sell some more. And I'm swatting them down like, you idiot. Why are you trading this stuff? It's like trading Bitcoin is a sign of like a lesser intellect, in Absolutely. My opinion. It's like, I'm like, come to your senses, just buy it and hold it.
Exactly. I imagine our respective, all the Bitcoin maximalists, our message inboxes would be hilarious to read because, these days a lot of us are probably getting hit up with interest in Bitcoin because of the price action and the macro environment. And knowing the maximalists as I do, I know how harshly we swat down the trading, the shit coining, the everything else. And I'd love, even just my inbox, it's always like, don't be a fucking moron. Don't you I want you to buy this and I don't want you to think about selling it. And certainly not selling it for, paper money. If in the future you want to convert it for a service or a good, then, that's allowable. But I don't want you to think about selling it for 5 to 10 years. I want you to secure it as if your life depended on it. And I don't want you to ever think about trading it or, going in the shitcoin casino. And the language is so, like, as you said, slapping them around, like in a manner that they're probably not used to, right?
Like... Yeah, it's my friend.
That's how we all talk to our friends now.
Eric, it's like picking up pennies on the railroad track.
Exactly.
It's like, you're going to get a few quarters and you're going to get hit by a train too. Like if you roll the clock back to 2007, Steve Jobs invents the iPhone. And, people thought, oh, it's a toy. By 2009, the iPhone's got an app store. And if you understood anything about software, the iOS is a new operating system, and it's going to be its own ecosystem, at least as important as the web. And it's going to spawn an entire new generation of applications, right? And the mobile wave is responsible for what, like $5 trillion, $5 to $10 trillion of wealth over the next decade. Can you imagine someone sitting around saying, oh, I get mobile device technology, and you're trying to time the market in Apple stock in 2011? Like you're buying and selling Apple stock in 2011. You want to shake. I'm like, are you out of your mind? I'm trading Facebook stock back and forth between $8 a share and $4 a share and $12 a share. And you just want to do this. Like, do you not understand that one day every single person on the planet is going to have one of these things in their pocket and it's going to go up by a factor of 100? And you're trying to trade Apple stock between $1.25 and $1.17 and bragging about how you bought it at $1.25 and sold it at $2.11. And have you figured out the consequences of being short the share if it goes up by $100? Like the amount that, like, are you out of your mind? Like, because, by the way, like I spent 30 years in the business and I obsess over this every single freaking minute of the day. And I wrote a book on it, right? I wrote the book. I predicted the future. You know, I made $500 million investing in these things, right? And I started, and I put a small amount of capital in. And let me tell you one thing, John, I can't time the market. I have no freaking clue. Like, you know, in 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, I have no clue. And I'm certain nobody in the world understood it better than me. Like, some people might have made more money than me, but you know, like all these people that think that somehow they're going to time the market and they're going to guess, it's probably 10,000 times harder to time the market when you know the future than it is to sit and to wait for a decade. And like, you know, the Bitcoin thing, this kind of is working in 12 weeks or 24 weeks. But when I did this, I didn't expect it to work in 12 weeks. I did it thinking that in 1 to 3 years, people will think I'm not an idiot. And in 10 years, I'll be happy I did it. And I'm ready to get beat to death for the first 1-2 years if people are going to beat me to death. Because you could have been beat to death on Facebook stock and Apple stock and Google stock and whatever in a 1 to 2, 3 year time frame. There's anybody that tells you that they actually know the direction of this stuff over the course of days or weeks or months, they're deluding themselves and they're deluding you. And it's almost comical because they all hold themselves out as being like experts in something. And like, I have been the expert in something. And the one thing that I knew was I had no, you know, the only time I ever lost money on Apple, the only time. But can you imagine losing money on Apple stock investing in the last 20 years at any point in time from 1997? There's not a single way, John, you could have lost money betting on Apple stock as a hodler in 22 years, except I did it. I'm going to tell you how I did it. I bought an option. I bought a leap. I actually bought a call option, but not short, long. I went long Apple stock. I bought call. By the way, I'm not going to go long Apple stock with a 30 or 60 or 90-day option. I bought an 18-month leap option on Apple stock. The stock traded down. It stayed down 17 months, 18 months. My option expired. I lost the premium and the stock shot up. And I'm saying, I freaking predicted the future. I wanted some leverage. I'm so angry. And the takeaway from that is, if you believe in something and you have conviction, buy the underlying asset, ideally with very low leverage or no leverage, and hold it forever.
Yeah.
You know, like, and all these other cute things, like you get cute. It's like, how could I be wrong in 18 months? It was 19 months, John. And I was right in 19 months and the option expired. It's almost like God punishing me for trying to be cute and gamble with this sort of thing. It's like,
yeah. And I think, you know, there's two, you said, why would anyone ever do that when it's so clear that the safest and most effective option is just to buy and hodl? I think the two reasons is, one, you either got something to sell, and I know you've had some discussions with people that may be in that category recently, or your time preference is such that, you know, you have a very high time preference, and so you're trying to make your gains immediately. I don't think you've properly assessed what that looks like over the course of 5, 10, 20 years, but you know, that's the choice you make. But it's an even more dangerous bet. You know, you're talking about Apple, but you know, with Bitcoin, there's an anxiety that if you let it go, you may not be able to get it back. I mean, I know it's an open market, it's liquid 24/7, but when you have an asset like this that has the level and degree of scarcity that Bitcoin has, and that has so much, like when people get Bitcoin, they don't just, as we were saying a little bit earlier, like the people that are making a 1% allocation, they're looking at the technical analysis, they're looking at its past performance and saying, maybe this will balance my portfolio. When you fully go down the rabbit hole, you know, you want to put all of your available, you know, that if it, whatever doesn't impair or impinge on your, you know, lifestyle, your standard of living, the rest of it, you want to put it in Bitcoin. And to think that you would be so bold to let go of that tether for a while, send it out into the world with enough certainty that you're going to be able to get it back and then some, I think is something that gives, you know, real hodlers so much anxiety that they wouldn't even think of it, you know?
I said it to Raul, you know, I said, I have anxiety going to bed at night if I'm short, you know, like there's the point when I started buying it, like, there's a funny story. I'm not going to say who I did it with. I started buying Bitcoin, you know, and they thought I was going to buy like $10 million worth of it. And I wired in $100 million, and I started buying it, and I bought 25 million in the day. And no one had ever bought $25 million worth of Bitcoin on their exchange in a few hours. And they said, well, what you're burning up the entire system and you're blowing out the spreads. And this is a big problem. And you're going to drive the price up. And I said, well, I just need to get this stuff. Like I can't, by the way, the price was down in the 9s. And I was just imagining someone was going to get smart and drive the price up to 10 or 11 or 12 or 13, and I was going to chase it up. So I had anxiety. I'm like, I have to get this trade in before the rest of the world comes to its senses. So I'm buying it. I swear to you, they put me in a corner and they said, you know, you have to stop now. You're buying too much. Like they literally put me in a corner and said, you know, you're buying too much. All the other people on the system feel like you're driving the price up. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, really? And, you know, and then I went to bed that night, you know, and I was just really like worked up. I could hardly sleep because they had cut me off when I bought 20 million and I wanted to buy 35 million that day. And I was like, what if the 15 million that I didn't buy starts to run away from me? It's going to cost me millions and millions of dollars. It doesn't really matter how much you buy, right? It's the same idea, which is I need to buy it all now before somebody figures this thing out.
Exactly.
And by the way, if you look at the dynamics of this as an asset, if I bought $100 million worth of Apple stock today, I could say I have big tech exposure. And then at the end of the quarter, I could say, well, maybe I should sell Apple and buy Google, or maybe I should sell Apple and buy Amazon. And I'm still kind of big tech exposed. I mean, you know, you could trade Twitter for Facebook or Facebook for Twitter, or you could decide that you don't like Facebook anymore, but you like Google. The world's not coming to an end. Anybody there's a lot of supply of big tech, $10 trillion worth of it, right? On the other hand, if you decided that Bitcoin was your thing, you're going to buy a crypto asset and you buy $100 million worth of Bitcoin. And this is, I say this because this is the way the institutions that buy this stuff are going to think. Well, they're going to come in there and buy 100 million or 200 million or 500 million. When you decide that you want that, you go through this thing of, okay, what do I want? Well, I don't want big tech because I don't like the underlying exposure to fiat cash flows. I don't want gold because, again, counterparty risk, and it's an open system and the gold miners are a problem. Okay, I want crypto. Which crypto? There's 6,500 cryptos. Well, write off most of those. Which one's the best crypto asset? Well, Bitcoin's the best crypto asset. Okay, what's the second best? There is no second best. There's no second best crypto asset. There's a crypto asset. It's called Bitcoin, right? Right? There's no second best. Okay. It's not like Google and Facebook. It's not like Apple and Amazon. Yeah. We can debate Apple or Amazon. What's better? They both look like tech monopolies to me. They both look pretty good. On the other end, Bitcoin or no, Bitcoin. Bitcoin's crypto asset. This entire idea of like 60% dominance is bullshit, ridiculous, stupid, right? Like it's stupid. It's not 60% dominant. It's like 96% or 95% dominant, right? The thing, if you compare it as a crypto asset to a like kind of proof of work crypto network, right? That's meant to be a store of value. You know, you're lucky if you can scrape together 5% of other stuff in the last bucket. So there is no real competitor. So once you go down that path of, well, big tech, no, this is not my big tech allocation. Gold, this is not my gold allocation. Crypto asset, this is my crypto asset. Bitcoin, it's the only one. Now you got to squeeze through a nozzle, which is $1 billion a day, and you have to buy it. And when, once you go through, I joked to my friend Eric, I said, I should tweet, this is the Hotel California, of assets. Like, you check in anytime you want, but you can never leave. He goes, no, you can't tweet that. That's, that's the dark reference. Like, I can't tweet it. Like, I can't. And then this morning I see like Nick tweets it, right? It's on the Twitter. I'm like, look, he tweeted it. Like, it's not, I wasn't so stupid after all. Like, it's a one-way valve. Okay. Yeah. So it's one way, you're buying. Why else is one way? Because it's long duration. Like, it's the ultimate long duration asset. And this is, if you don't get this, you just don't get this, right? I say 100 years, you could hold it 100 years. You're definitely, it's longer duration than any bond, any stock, any gold, if you do the math. So I just bought the pharmaceutical grade synthetic gold, pharmaceutical grade, long duration, safe haven asset. That's what I bought. There's nothing better. Now, why am I ever going to sell it? What am I going to trade it for Google? Well, no, I can't trade it for Google. I can't trade it for Amazon. I can't trade it for gold. I can't trade it for any other crypto. And so it's a one-way trade. So why would I ever sell? By the way, when I do sell, I get a tax hit. So I'm going to get capital gains to sell it. So that's a deterrent from selling any asset. But my deterrent for selling an asset is I can't find a better treasury reserve asset. There's nothing longer duration. There's nothing that's going to last longer. There's nothing that's going to be more anti-fragile. There's nothing that's going to have a higher theoretical long-term yield, right? The long-term theoretical yield on Bitcoin is like, it's the monetary inflation plus the technology utility increase plus the surging adoption. All of those three in the near term, and over the long term productivity growth of the economy that adopts it as the standard. So those things are all going to drive it. They're all going to drive it in a compelling way. So now, why would you sell it? And the only answer, which you pointed out, is like, if you want to buy a jet or a yacht, if a maximalist wants to buy a jet or a yacht, I respect that. If you want to buy the palatial villa of your dreams in Ibiza, okay, have at it. If you want to get married, or if you want to marry your daughter, or send off your kids or send them to college, if there's something you love, an expenditure, an asset of passion, I think I can respect that. And by the way, if there's something that's a life or death issue, you're going to sell it to give a kidney to somebody, or to save a life. Sure. I respect that, but it needs to be an expenditure of passion. If you're just selling it in order to trade into another financial asset, right? You're a fool. Right? Yeah. So selling the long duration pharmaceutical grade synthetic safe haven asset, the first one, selling that to buy something which has got more exposure to fiat debasement or to complexity or other types of risk, or shorter term, is kind of just, you had the thing solved and you unsolved the thing. And so anybody that says they're going to trade it, the conclusion you come to is they just don't understand it. They literally don't understand what they're doing, and they don't understand what it is. As soon as you understand what it is, you're just going to sweep all your excess monetary energy, your savings account, into this and hodl forever. Right. And the other point is, most hodlers, most people don't have the experience to be able to borrow against an asset, because Bitcoin is a very immature asset class. The first decade, there's no mature crypto banking. In the next decade, you'll see the formation of Bitcoin banks or crypto banks, the Binances and Coinbases and Krakens and the like, and all the institutions will evolve to the point where they accept your Bitcoin as collateral, and they'll start to grant you loans. And then what you'll see is that eventually the logical wealth building strategy is you save everything you possibly can in Bitcoin. And at some point, when you really want the yacht or the jet or you want the massive house, or you need money to save your life, or to launch your business, or start up something of passion, then you'll borrow against your underlying Bitcoin at some rate, and then you'll use the borrow and you'll leverage up, because that's what every wealthy real estate family ever did. What most people do is they're leveraging their assets to go into new businesses, and they're keeping the assets forever.
Yeah. What I tell a lot of the people that are coming to me now about wanting to get in, because you can tell them not to trade, but greed is a hell of a drug, and they think, and so is ego, right? So they think they can outsmart the markets or whatever. So I try to instill in them, make Bitcoin your unit of account. So the number that you should be watching is your Bitcoin balance. You got 0.01, you got 0.1, you got 1, you got 10, you got whatever. Not the USD equivalent, not the CAD equivalent. What is your Bitcoin balance? That's the thing that you want to see increase. That's it, right? But speaking of, hodling Bitcoin and getting it and grokking it, for a lot of people, once you understand it, once you understand what it is, you begin to look at everything else in your life, all your other assets, and say, well, would I rather have that, or would I rather have more Bitcoin? What's a better thing to hold? And as you said, like, if it's something that you love, then that's a more serious question. But if it's like, I've got this asset that is doing nothing for me, I barely use it, maybe it's real estate, maybe it's another financial asset, should I turn that into Bitcoin? And I heard you say recently on another podcast that, I don't know if you were, what if this was accurate or not, but you said, houses, yachts, jets, these sorts of things. Having been in, orange pilled over the past year, are you looking at, let's say, the abundance of assets under your control and saying, would I rather have more Bitcoin, or would I rather have, that yacht or whatever? Are you looking at things like like when you say you go to bed chronically short, are you trying to satisfy that by looking around at your life and saying, maybe I should convert things into more Bitcoin?
I'm pretty happy with the stuff I have. I only buy beautiful things. Like out of 1,000, if you walked onto 1,000 yachts, there'd be one that I would want, like either the one I built, like, for example, I built one, it's me, like I designed every line, like it's, I don't have daughters, I don't have sons, I have yachts, right? I have things that I have, with architecture, like I design, I have an apartment with that's built from 165,000 different puzzle pieces of wood, leather, and metal and stone, right? So they're intricate things that are reflections of my personality and my artistic or architectural values. So yeah, if I had stuff that I didn't care about, I probably wouldn't own it, or I'd get rid of it, and I do. But if I have it, it's because it's beautiful and it makes me happy to gaze upon it one way or the other. And that's my view toward those things. And I think that Bitcoin is a very beautiful asset. I think you're defined by how you're going to allocate your energy in your life, right? What are your values? So I only focus my energy on things that I find to be beautiful, or that I can make beautiful through some investment.
Yeah, that's awesome. We touched on this right at the beginning, but the propensity of engaging with Bitcoin, learning about Bitcoin, and once through the process of doing that, realizing or beginning to feel the ways in which it changes your perspective, the ways it changes your energy, the way it changes your outlook. You've got hope.com, which you're hosting a lot of the resources that you guys consulted when you made the decision with MicroStrategy, and the interviews you've been doing. And that's awesome. Kudos for that. But, hope is I think we're beginning to realize or maybe realize for the first time the power of hope. And, I mentioned it recently on another podcast, but I think you're a bit of a different case, because you've been successful for a long time. You've found success in the existing system, and that's wonderful. But I think a lot of people, particularly in the younger generation, they were looking out on the world. And once, the internet generation, once you kind of gain an understanding for how the world works, surely there's still a lot of beauty in the world, but there seems to be a lot of obstacles too. There seems to be a lot of darkness. And you look out and you kind of think, how, or what's the, why bother, or whatever. And there seems to be a lot of impediments, I guess is what I'm saying. Whether that's true or not, that seems to be the perception that predominates a lot of the younger people today. And when you understand what Bitcoin is, what it represents, and what the implications are, the future starts to look a lot different, because now you have hope. And now you have this thing that seems to be dissolving a lot of those impediments. And one of the things and that's such a powerful, motivating, rejuvenated perspective. And one of the things that I'm so interested in this space is, again, not so much the economics of this and how wealthy you're going to be in the future. I'm interested in the Renaissance, and the Renaissance is going to be a function of how we change our behavior. Bitcoin is nothing but something that allows us to behave differently and interact differently. And I've noticed that across all the conversations I've had, and with all the cyber hornets and the plebs, is these dramatic changes in behavior across the board. And I think part of that is because now you look out and you see kind of limitless potential on the horizon. And that shines the spotlight back on you to say, okay, now there's nothing but potential. And the only impediment is you. So what are you going to change about yourself? What are you going to refine? What are you going to do differently in terms of your behavior that's going to allow you to access more of that potential? And I think that's been part of the transformative impact that Bitcoin has on people's perspectives. Not the only one for sure, but that they now look out on the horizon and they see hope and possibility and potential and something worth striving for. And I think that's incredibly powerful. And I think that's going to be a huge driver of this renaissance we're seeing. And to kind of bring it back to you, and like I said, even though you come from a history, you've built a successful life for yourself, and hopefully you don't mind me making this observation, but I looked at some of your videos, speeches that you gave, whether it's for MicroStrategy or interviews for the book previously, all the way up until December of 2019, last year. And the person that I'm interacting with right now looks and feels different than the person I watched give speeches from 2009 all the way to 2019. I mean, your appearance is a bit different, you're smiling more, your energy is a bit different. And so to me, even someone like you who quote unquote had it all, right? You got all the toys and accolades and success. This thing still has a powerful transformative effect on you and on your energy and how you express yourself. And I'm just wondering if you've reflected on, first of all, if you agree with that characterization, but if you've reflected on to what degree that's been true for you.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, Bitcoin is hope. We could put a period on it, but I think Bitcoin is transformative. And the idea, right? The idea of a true monetary network is a transformative idea, a very big idea. And I think that people can get worn down in the traditional system. And a lot of times when they come through that portal and their eyes open and they start to see the world differently, it kind of is inspirational. Certainly, I see the economy differently today. I see the world differently today. I have a different mission. I have a mission today that was not on my shoulders before, but we all need a reason to live, right? And I think this is a pretty good reason to live. I mean, it's the definition of hope. I mean, it really is kind of elemental.
What, when you use the term hope, I just put some kind of words on why or maybe not why I see it as hope, but kind of the impact of it being perceived as hope. Why is it you think that it represents hope for some of those people that may not be seeing it the same way as you?
Well, because for a long time, right, and we can discuss when this started. Maybe it's just been forever. The people of the world have been struggling against the current, the political current, right? struggling against the political current. As you debase the currency, everybody has to fight their way uphill, and it's a struggle. And it got to be bigger starting in 1971, but we had it from World War I, and I guess people, dated back the fall of the Roman Empire, right? When they started debasing the currency, and we plunged in the Dark Ages, right? You can trace a lot of the challenges of mankind to the lack of an effective currency, right? The human condition has struggled from toxicity in the currency, right? If Bitcoin is perfected or engineered monetary energy, Thomas Edison gave us electrical energy, and John D. Rockefeller gave us chemical energy. And the human condition has been dramatically elevated by chemical energy, electrical energy, and by the way, antibiotics, you could think of them, as biological energy. If you think about what's the impact of antibiotics, well, we go from living 50 years in 1900 to living 70 years in 1950. Okay, so did antibiotics matter? Well, if you wanted to live an extra 20 years, it mattered. Does electricity matter? Pretty obvious, right? There's no city on Earth without electricity. There's no skyscraper. Does oil matter? Absolutely. I mean, John D. Rockefeller drove down the cost of energy by a factor of 10,000 on the entire human civilizations based upon oil. If one man did more, right? It's hard to figure out who could have done more than that. So the humans have struggled under toxic, defective monetary energy for thousands of years, right? Gold was defective. It was defective before 1933 when Roosevelt seized it. It's always been defective. It was the least defective. I'm reminded that, well-meaning physicians bled George Washington to death, right? They bled him to death, right? Because blood was toxic, and so they bled him out. And it just and that's why we don't really like politicians, right? To make decisions about blood transfusion. And so if we look through the history of man, elevation of the human condition has always been a function of engineering breakthroughs. When we got fire, that elevated us above the animals. That type of energy, and all of the other breakthroughs were aqueducts channel gravitational energy, right? So channeling of these energies, the chemical energy, the gravitational energy, the electrical energy, they were all really critical. And the human race has struggled under a defective monetary energy. And Bitcoin is the first true perfected monetary energy system that we managed to create. And it's not, people say it's a discovery. It's not quite a discovery, not in my opinion. I think it's an invention. It's like, for example, when we created AC current and we managed to electrify an entire city, right? That the breakthrough wasn't the discovery of electricity. If you got struck by lightning, you discovered electricity. The breakthrough was the engineering, the channeling, and the storage of electrical energy, right? Just like fire. Well, John D. Rockefeller didn't discover fire, and he didn't discover that, napalm burns, right? A lot of people the Greeks knew that napalm burned in Greek fire. He didn't discover it. He stored it and channeled it. And so Bitcoin is the storing and the channeling of clean monetary energy, sterile monetary energy. Why did we die at age 50, right, in 1900? Well, because of infection and antibiotics. When you understand the science of sterilization and you understand infection, then we stop dying of infectious disease. We conquer them. And the human, all of these political systems, all these economic systems throughout the history of the human race, they've been collapsing because of unsterile money, right? Toxic money. And a currency war, we talk about a currency war, when I'm expanding the monetary supply, I'm sucking the oxygen out of the room. I'm sucking the energy out of the currency. But currency is blood. And if I suck the oxygen out of your blood, it's like I'm bleeding you to death. And so the breakthrough is if I strap you down and I put toxic chemicals in you and administer chemotherapy to a healthy 18-year-old, right? That's the problem, right? We've been administering chemotherapy through the currency to all of these societies to varying degrees, right? And in the Weimar Republic, it was a quick collapse, and in Venezuela, it's an obvious collapse, and in Argentina and Turkey, it's a methodic and pretty progressive collapse, and in the U.S., it's just been a slow toxic drip that now is a rapid toxic drip. And so I would say, come March 2000, right? Imagine you're lying on the table and someone's administering, toxic chemicals into your blood, and you've been going about your business and you didn't realize that it's killing you. And then you realize, and you pull the line out of your arm, and you're like, oh, I don't really need this anymore. I can actually go without the toxic chemical treatment. And that's the source of hope, right? It's the breakthrough intellectually to realize that the chemicals weren't making you healthier. It's like the scene in Captain Marvel. You remember, did you see the movie Captain Marvel?
No.
She's the most powerful woman in the universe, and yet she can't quite reach her full potential because they put some kind of governor chip in the back of her neck that keeps her from understanding what she can do. And eventually she pulls the chip out, and then she beats all the bad guys and defeats everybody. When she pulls that chip out and you realize that she's got the power of a neutron star, man, that's the climax of the movie.
Yeah. You
see that over and over again. By the way, the thing that's played out right in front of our face is the modern understanding of diabetes and metabolic disease and the role of sugar. And if you go back 30 years, people talked about the major food groups, and there was no recognition that sugar caused diabetes. And of course, now there's a lot of people would point out, right, that sugar is toxic, and that's the secret to the paleo diet, the keto diet. And if you have type 2 diabetes, right, the obvious thing to do is cut off sugar, right? Just stop eating. And sugar is toxic. It kills you, causes metabolic disease, right? Causes diabetes. What is monetary expansion? It's diabetes to the civilization. By the way, you look at some of those old videos of me, if you go back 10 years, I was 30 pounds heavier. Yep. You know why I was 30 pounds heavier? I didn't understand that sugar is toxic. And at some point it clicked, and I figured it out, and I stopped eating or drinking anything with sugar, and I stopped consuming sugar and starch. I lost 30 pounds and I became happy and a lot healthier, a lot happier, cleared my head. And, if you're giving a gift to any individual, by the way, my mother died, from metabolic disease complications from too much sugar, right? I know lots of people around me that I love that died from it. Probably everybody in the world probably knows someone that died of an illness which is driven by metabolic disease because they had too much sugar.
Yeah.
Right. And by the way, what gave us that? It was like government said the 4 major food groups jammed that down your throat. Right. And they were the big advocates of the low fat diet, which is the most garbagey thing in the world. So if we were having a discussion of something changing the civilization, I would say, take sugar out of your diet will change the civilization. You'll live 10 years longer. And if we were talking about politics and economics, I'd say, take toxic currency, right? Replace the toxic currency with pure clean monetary energy, right? It's the same thing. That's why it's so critical spiritually and from a health point of view and to the civilization. And that's why it's a source of hope.
Yeah. I think another one, metaphors stem from the Matrix as well, right? Because there's so many good analogies to being unplugged, right? Seeing the world for as it really is. And maybe as a result of doing that, first kind of struggling to see the real state of the world, and then, building back up out of that. There's so many great metaphors and memes in this space. And I think you're right. I think there has been this invisible suppressant or governor on people's minds and in the system that they're forced to operate within. And to now have that governor taken off your mind, and then realize that you have a tool to express, greater freedom, greater intent, greater will out in the broader world. That's an incredibly liberating feeling. And so your task is just to come to grips, come to terms, come and understand that liberating tool and mechanism and feeling, and then channel it in the way that you see most fit. And it's so fascinating to me that, I talk to so many people, and once they grok Bitcoin, once they have that, once the veil is lifted, once their perception is cleansed, that light, that perception gets put on every other area of their life. As you said, their health. I mean, so many Bitcoiners said that, recount that exact same story that you just recounted. Before Bitcoin, I treated my body like shit. I wasn't trying to build my body up. Everything I was doing was kind of detracting from my health. And now that I'm into Bitcoin, not only do I not want to spend on that, whatever bullshit it was that was taking away from my health, whether it was junk food or, overly hedonistic activities or whatever, but I want to build myself up. So I'm getting rid of the shit in my diet, the fiat food, as Safe likes to say, and, a manifestation of that system, that sick system conjures up all these sick fruits that you're tricked into eating, and they have a suppressant effect on you. And once you can eliminate those and start building back up from a stronger, more truthful, more hopeful foundation, you start to become a vastly different person. That's why I asked you the question, because it seems to me at this point that it's impossible to grok, to be this far down the Bitcoin rabbit hole and not have it influence you on a pretty substantial level in various other areas of your life, and I was curious what they were for you.
Once you understand, it gives you a moral center. I mean, at least it drives you toward a moral center. There's a certain morality.
And why do you think that is? What process do you think is underpinning that?
Well, I think humble submission to the laws of nature. Like, for example, let's take the paleos. The whole idea of paleo diet and paleo lifestyle is human beings have been on the planet for 3 million years. We've only lived in an agricultural society for 10,000 years. Genetically, we're evolved based on the entire 3 million years. So how do you think we lived 100,000 years ago? What did we eat? What did we do? Do you think we sat around and watched Netflix all day? You do the analysis, you realize, like, if you came across a cane of sugar, or a field of sugar cane, you'd have to eat like 68 feet of sugar cane to get the equivalent of like 2 Cokes or something, right. or a carton of orange juice. And so when you start to think about, well, what was life like? Well, it wasn't like the life we have today. And when you start to diverge from that Paleolithic lifestyle, like you don't move and you eat super high starch, super processed foods, when you drink, it's not likely that 100,000 years ago, anybody drank a carton of orange juice, ate a birthday cake, and sat around all day. It just, and had 16 shots of tequila. Not likely that happened. So if you're feeling bad after you did those things, it might be because it's an unnatural thing for you to have done, right? So, similarly with fasting, right? It's not likely we ate 3 meals a day every day. Why do you live 90 days without food? It's because the earth goes around the sun and you have a 90-day winter. And for millions of years, mammals have adapted such that they can last through winter on low amounts of food. if the Earth went around the sun every 2 years, your metabolism would probably be half as fast. You'd probably live longer. So we're adapted, and when we live in some kind of harmony with nature and the way we adapted over millions of years, it tends to be healthier. When we engineer systems like bridges that respect the laws of gravity, right? Aqueducts, right? That they go like this and the water goes downhill. And when you design an aqueduct that's pretty, that's an S shape, it just doesn't work, right? Things that are designed against the laws of physics and nature don't work. They break, you get immediate feedback. When you actually apply that to any part of your life, to nutrition, when you say, well, what's violating the laws of nature, right? And then what is in harmony with the laws of nature, you normally get a better result. And I think Bitcoin is I'm submitting to the laws of nature in my monetary affairs. And what follows next is, is it not obvious to anybody that if you have 10 years worth of food, you're probably going to live longer and healthier and happier than if you've 1 day worth of food stored up? I mean, it should be pretty obvious, right? If I have 500 million in a treasury versus 1 million in the treasury, which of the two is a healthier company? How are we even having that debate, right? In the absence of Bitcoin, I have to basically convert the 500 million in cash into 500 million in stock, and I have to decapitalize the company in order to keep the stock from crashing. And if I don't, the stock crashes, and then then the company fails. And if I do, and I get one blip like a pandemic, then the company runs out of cash and the company fails. Or I have to go and beg hat in hand to the government, to a politician, to bail me out. And then I am basically corrupted by the political process. So living without monetary energy is a corrupting, or it's a dangerous, or it's suicidal behavior. In the absence of Bitcoin, I'm forced into corruption or failure or ruin. And that means, since I know I'm likely to be ruined, that means I have to live for today, right? My time horizon shorten, my risk taking increases, and that's a moral hazard. And my entire issue, right, with investment today is investment in bonds and equities tends to be a moral hazard. Like we've been forced into a moral hazard. When you buy a bond that yields 0.5% interest, and the only way for you to ever make money is for the interest rates to go negative, that's a moral hazard. Yeah, and when you make money doing an irrational thing, because someone who has more power than you is more irrational than you, that's a moral hazard. So if you choose to invest in that thing, you have been drawn into a moral hazard. When you buy a risk-free equity, that's called buying a monopoly. When you buy a product or buy an equity in a company where the government has made it illegal to buy from anybody else other than that company, how is that not a moral hazard? What if I had a company and the government passed a law making it illegal to buy from any of my competitors, and my revenues went up and my stock went up? Is that not a problem? And I'm not going to mention which companies. We're not going to go there. You can figure it out if you're smart. You have in the absence of Bitcoin, I have a choice between one moral hazard and another moral hazard, right? In the absence of Bitcoin, if corporate treasuries can't buy Bitcoin, they have to borrow money from the government, and then they have to buy their own debt, and they have to decapitalize and shorten and weaken themselves, or they have to watch their stocks decay to zero. So what is it? Bitcoin is hope. Why? Because at least you have an alternative to the morally hazardous trade. Right? And I could go on for a while, but I see it's that way in the corporate world. Corporate executives have this this perilous moral hazard. In the investor world, they're stuck in the same area. It's a moral hazard. And in the individual world, right, in the absence of Bitcoin, I said to, one of the things I said today is, right, politicians have destroyed the savings bank, and the bank of Bitcoin is going to bring it back. Mm-hmm. Well, most people, the younger generation, they don't remember what but destroyed a savings account. Most people don't remember what a savings account is. They don't even know what a savings account is. It used to be, you're a Boy Scout, you deliver papers, you save some money, you put it in the bank, and a savings account, you get interest. Banks used to form the role of a trusted fiduciary, and they would give you risk-free interest. And that was a happy world, right? I drive a tractor, I drive a truck, I deliver papers, I work in a bar, I take my hard-earned money, I put it in a savings account, I get interest, I save for the future, I save for a rainy day, I save for the American dream, right? There was a straightforward thing. The political system destroyed the savings account, but that's the same as destroying everybody's path to the American way. Now, the paper boy has to be a hedge fund manager. And, John, I meet lots of people. How many times I get pitched by someone who's a financial advisor in my life? Probably thousands? Do you know how many financial advisors have pitched me that were more successful at investment than me? None. Okay. Nonstop, never-ending people pitching me on financial advice and trading schemes and analyst schemes, quad 4 this, right? And quad 2 that, and arbitrage of this. And I've heard everything under the sun, and none of them as successful as me. And what I'm telling you is the only thing I've ever found that works is figure out where the future is headed, some massive trend, wait until the market has selected the winner, like Apple, like Google, right? I mean, before Google, there's Yahoo and the whatever, like Facebook. After the market has selected the winner, and after it's obvious it's going to get 100 times bigger, and after it's 100 times bigger than the next best thing, buy some and wait. That's what I figured out. I feel sorry for the 20-somethings and the teenagers and the 30-somethings. They're sifting through all this, trying to figure out what to buy and what to sell and how to time it. And on the other hand, I kind of get angry. I get really angry that 67-year-old retiree that spent his or her life working hard takes their life savings, and they have to guess and bet which of these 500 equities. By the way, of the S&P 500, right? How many of them were winners? You talk to me, I would have said to you, well, Amazon's going to crush every retailer. Apple's going to crush everybody. Google's going to crush everybody. I knew that. But how I feel for my father that's buying British Petroleum and trying to figure out whether British Petroleum is going to compete with Exxon Mobil or whether the merger will go through. And he's supposed to figure that out at age 80.
Yeah.
It makes you angry that what have the politicians done to us, right? That they've destroyed our savings account. They've destroyed the currency. But it's a double whammy, right? They're destroying your currency by injecting toxicity into it, by sucking the oxygen out of it. And by law, you have to function with the currency. I can't do business without it. So it's your blood. I can't get rid of it. They've strapped me down and forced, chemicals into my blood for my own good. And then they took away the bank and they shut it down and destroyed it. And, you get people are literally getting 13 basis points interest on their savings right now, 17 basis points interest, and you ought to be happy about that because they're planning to make that negative if they can. Right. And then they're just going to take away just 1% of your money every year, or 0.5% or whatever it is. That's the world we're living in. It strikes me as being a morally hazardous world. And if you take away Bitcoin, there really is no hope. I don't have a good suggestion for you. I mean, there's just a lot of bad strategy. Like it's just a matter of how slowly are you going to lose, and how can I alleviate your suffering for a while.
Yeah.
Right. And what happened with Bitcoin is, and the reason you believe in it, and the reason the Maximalists believe in it, and the reason the Hornets will tear everybody limb from limb if they attack it, which they should, is Bitcoin is the first time when we finally managed to flip the polarity on something which is slowly sucking our life force out of it. And maybe you actually have a chance to do something which is not morally hazardous. And as soon as you find that, then you have hope. And then once you have hope, there's a solution here. Now that gives you the energy to go fix your personal life and fix your family life and fix, it's like, maybe I'm going to be able to do something. Maybe I can fix that park, or maybe I can get that dog or that horse, or maybe I can actually learn. Maybe there's a point in doing something that will take me a while, because I can see a method by which I might achieve that in a moral fashion.
Yeah, and I think the analogy to being drugged up, whether it's chemo or whatever, is a good one, because once you're not, zombified by this, metaphorical drug of fiat money and all the attendant consequences of that system, then yeah, you can fucking run faster. You can, jump through hoops. You can, you can build things. You just have access to so much greater energy through whatever process may be underpinning that, hope and various others, to say, yeah, wow, I didn't realize that this is what even being alive felt like, because we're all, I think it's, I think we will look back on this period when it's written about in the history books, whether it's 100 years from now or more, as being so obvious how much of a suppressant on the human spirit the system in which we're currently living has been and is on all the people living under it. Right now, we think we're at the vanguard of modern civilization, and we've got all these funky toys, and we think, yeah, we've got some political problems here and there, but this is the best it's ever been, and it's pretty darn good. I think once Bitcoin has the opportunity to churn through humanity, and that Bitcoin renaissance takes place, and we look back from the perspective of being 100 years into that renaissance, we'll look back in horror at the circumstance that prevails right now, that people are born, because of the type of system and governance that we have, people are born into debt slavery. You're born with a debt now if you live in a certain, just by virtue of the fact that you live within certain imaginary lines, within a certain jurisdiction. Your potential is capped because people are siphoning off your wealth unbeknownst to you and without your consent or control. And I think that is why, once you realize that is happening, and once you put those orange colored glasses on, you can kind of see the matrix, and you see the disparity between what's going on now and what the possibilities are under a Bitcoin system. That is why it's so compelling. That's why you got to tweet about it all day long. That's why you got to wear the t-shirts. That's why you got to have these conversations. That's why you got to do the podcast, all that, because you realize the value of bringing about that renaissance even a day earlier, right? So that the human spirit can be unleashed, so that we can see the beauty that's going to net from the expression of that human spirit that's in each of us. And I think that's also why, people ask a lot of times, is Bitcoin a religion? You just said it was kind of a moral compass, a moral center. And I think for that very reason, people start to make those comparisons. And look, religion has a lot of baggage, so maybe that's the wrong word, but does
ideology.
Yeah. Or
ideology.
Is Bitcoin, the premise for a different orienting perspective on life? I mean, that's what spirituality kind of is. That's what kind of religion kind of is. It informs the perspective with which you look out on the world and say, who am I, and what is this world, and what can be the creative force between the two, and what does that yield? And so from that perspective, and if we're right about the way we've been articulating this thing, I think it does kind of form the basis of a new quote unquote spirituality, or a new orienting perspective compass with which people can use to properly orient themselves in the world. That's what I think the purpose religion has served throughout the ages. And I see no reason why, for the reasons that we've been discussing, Bitcoin wouldn't have the same effect.
No, I agree with you. I think it subtly changes the way you interpret everything. A great example of this is when the Fed announced just a couple of days ago. There's an article in the Wall Street Journal. They're buying $120 billion worth of debt each month. I did the calculation and I realized that's about $11,200 per family or per household in the United States. And we just take it for granted. And most of the conventional world, the non-Bitcoiners, they take it for granted that, oh, well, the Fed is buying debt to support the system. But you see, you had two very different options. If you just gave everybody $11,200, you'd be expanding the monetary supply, but it would be expanded equally across all 120 million families. They would buy their own house, pay down their mortgage. They would have a credit, an asset. They would, to their name, and you would have issued in an egalitarian fashion, whatever the number is, right? $1 trillion worth of assets to the people. But instead, by buying the debt, the Fed is issuing the assets to the banks. The banks, and they're doing it to keep, quote unquote, the interest rate low. So the bank is then allowing 5 or 10% of those people to borrow money to buy a house that costs twice as much as it would otherwise cost, and then owe all of their future cash flows to the bank. So we're basically leaving 60, 70, 80% of the population out. The 20% that get a quote unquote low interest rate, they get the gift of debt. They get the gift of being indebted and having to buy the assets that they want, their house, at double the rate that they'd otherwise have to pay. That's the housing bubble. And the banks own everybody. And so you're really benefiting the bond traders, you're benefiting the banks, you're driving up the asset values of things that people need, and you're leaving some large portion of people. If you can't buy the something with debt, right? If you're a renter, well, how does that help you, right? Maybe it trickles in some random way, but it's a gross distortion. Just give the people the money. The politicians have chosen to indebt everyone, with the bankers holding the keys and strengthen the banks, instead of choosing to abolish $1 trillion of debt by issuing the cash directly. I might pay down my debt. Now, by the way, not only would I pay down the $1 trillion of debt, but I also would see all the assets that I need to buy deflate, right? The things that the 300 million people need, they would get cheaper, right? Or maybe I shouldn't say it that way. I would say that you wouldn't see the bubbles in a set of scarce assets, and you would see everybody in an egalitarian way be able to get what they want. It's a simple political decision, but no one even questions. I don't think there's a debate between the Democratic or the Republican Party about whether or not that's the appropriate thing. Right? I mean, if you had a candidate that said, I want to give the money directly to the people instead of keep the interest rates low, that would be interesting. We don't have that debate right now. The orange pill, the Bitcoiners, they get it. You get it after you get Bitcoin. Before you get Bitcoin, you just don't think very deeply about the entire subject.
And that's why Bitcoin is so powerful and so interesting, because all of these things, and look, whether you print $1 trillion and you give it to people, or you print $1 trillion and you put it through the banking system and let the kind of Cantillon effect, do its thing. At the end of the day, there's still no free lunches. Yes, it would be better to go direct to the people, but you're still, it's going to have its effect on prices, and you're not really solving anything.
And prices will go up across the board.
Exactly.
By $1 trillion divided by the money supply.
Right. And so the reason, Bitcoin is just here now to just smash the whole thing and say, okay, you didn't want, your corruption, your greed, your et cetera, didn't, couldn't hold this thing together, couldn't do it the way that it's supposed to do, couldn't do it fairly. So now Bitcoin's going to force the issue. It's this massive wrecking ball of economic truth that's going to that's going to assert its truth on the entire world. And it's happening little by little by little. And, you know, we, again, if we look back from that perspective of the, you know, 100 years into the Renaissance, you mentioned like the paperboy before, and I think it's typically characterized as this fiat system pushes people out on the risk spectrum in order to get, even to preserve the value of their savings, right? And the Bitcoin bank is the risk-free rate of return is a deflationary currency, right? So if you're holding a deflationary currency, then, you know, let's say your return was roughly equivalent to the growth and productivity over the course of a year. So maybe the value of your savings is increasing 2-3% a year as a result of reflecting the productivity that it has to value in the broader economy. Just imagine, you know, typically these days, if you're middle class, upper middle class, you'll get left something by your parents. Maybe it's a little bit of cash, maybe it's real estate, whatever. But because of the nature of the system that it's in, those things, you know, are highly distorted in different ways, of course. But, you know, dawned on me recently that within a couple generations of being on a sound, incorruptible money like Bitcoin, just imagine the starting place that a lot of, you know, that a third generation, fourth generation will be starting from. If the same, you know, if your first generation leaves some money, then the next one, then the next one, I feel like, you know, people will be starting from a place not of being in debt by 40,000 just by virtue of being born or whatever the number is, but actually having a solid foundation so that both through your education, I know this is something that's near and dear to your heart, through your education, you don't have to be put through an industrial education machine so that you can come out the other end and be a cog in the wheel, but you can actually engage in an education that's in line with your, you know, what flows naturally to you, that, and whatever your creative spirit wants to express, you can go through an education system that will help you refine that. And you don't have to worry so much about, you know, putting a roof over your head and feeding yourself, because with each passing generation, that foundation that that's passed on to you is stronger and stronger, because it's not being depleted with each successive generation. It's not leaking value every single generation. It's stronger and stronger. And then, of course, the people that nets out in the world, when you leave the education system and you enter the economy, what kind of an economy do we get when it's filled with people that are expressing things that they're genuinely curious about, interested in, and passionate about? I mean, we get a far more dynamic, diverse, amazing, beautiful world as a result of that, you know? And so again, the disparity between where we will be and where we are now is going to, you know, horrify our future historians, I think.
Yeah, I agree. We see the effect of the spread of mobile phones on empowerment, right? In a world where billions of people have mobile phones, they're empowered in a way they weren't before. We see the effect of the spread of the internet on empowerment. If you think about the empowerment that Google provides someone by giving YouTube away for free to billions of people, and what you can do with YouTube, I think that's interesting. Even though, I mean, you know, we see the effect of Twitter and Facebook on empowerment, right? There are critics of this and that and the other thing. Even Amazon, they're all empowering in a way, and they're all reshaping our world. And Bitcoin is that technology network that's spreading in order to allow people to store and channel pure monetary energy. We need the network we need the technology or the network in order to make a difference in the world. If all we had was the ideology, well, the ideology was Austrian economics. Mm-hmm. You saw how that worked out in the 20th century.
Sterile without a tool to carry it, basically.
Right. So it's like a pure math. You know, Isaac Newton writes Principia Mathematica. That's kind of interesting. On the other hand, when we use it to create an airplane, that's pretty tangible. When we use it to create a bridge, it's tangible. As long as it's just words on a piece of paper, it's theory. So what we've seen with Bitcoin is it's the first time we managed to engineer an economic system that stores and channels pure monetary energy. And it's the basis for a new economy, a Bitcoin economy, the economies it's competing against are, the U.S. dollar economy, and then every other fiat economy, and it's displacing portions of these economies, the weaker ones that will displace faster, the stronger ones it will displace slower. And it serves as a deterrent, even if it doesn't replace a given economy, and it just serves as a deterrent against the worst behavior in that economy. It becomes a countervailing force, and it becomes a source of energy for those individuals, organizations, and agencies that adopt it as their base energy source for their economy. And so we're watching the world rewire itself. And it's picking up steam, but to your point, I mean, how long will it take, and how far will it spread? It's hard to know how rapidly it spreads. All we know is that it's a cleansing energy. It's like building an economy on clean monetary energy for the first time in human history. And I guess just like Saifedean would say, the world was better under a gold standard. It was the golden age. People ate better food and they created better buildings, and their art and their music was better. And, some people don't like him for saying that, there's little debates in the community, but I get what he's saying and I understand it. And I don't disagree. I think we see the same thing circling the Bitcoin ecosystem, except it'll be stronger and better because the effectiveness, of a pure monetary energy network is, in theory, 1,000,000 times better than the effectiveness of a gold energy network.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why you can look back at those golden eras and say, yeah, things were way better under a gold standard. If you see how much better Bitcoin is than gold, then, it gives you that tingly feeling of what the hell are we in store for in terms of a future if the same process plays out, if a civilization built on those rails, on that pure monetary energy, is able to be established, and we're all placing our bets that it is, what does that look like? And, as I said before, you've clearly been energized and maybe revivified as a result of going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. And it's awesome to see, man. I mean, I love the tweets. I love how much time you're giving to the community. I suspect a person like you is going to channel that energy in a certain way. And I've heard you speak a little bit about, what other lines of business you might do with MicroStrategy and stuff. But do you have other ambitions? You look out and you see this renaissance happening, and, you're in a strong position, both from an understanding point of view and from a capital point of view, staking your claim on the network, that kind of thing. Do you, do you have visions of kind of a greater role that you want to play in this world that we're currently creating together?
Well, I think that my checklist is be a responsible advocate of Bitcoin to the investment community. Be an advocate of Bitcoin to the corporate community. Be a appropriate fiduciary for my own shareholders and my own company, and protect their interest. I think as a Bitcoin holder, support the security of the network and the security of the software, and look at different ways to do that. I think contribute to education, both institutional education, which I do in one fashion, and then consumer education. I have a big passion and interest in just educating the world. So like the Saylor Academy is just giving away free education to everybody forever. Like if I could just give away a free college degree to everyone on earth, I wouldn't mind creating 1 billion people with PhDs for free. And I think it can be done technically. And so I'm interested in that, and to the extent that Bitcoin, like we're actively working on Bitcoin educational products that we'll host and put in the open, we'll distribute via Creative Commons license. So we'll put it into open source and give away to the world. And I see there's education, all sorts of Bitcoin related education and Austrian economics education and other types of education that can be created and given away. I'm excited about that. At the corporate level, MicroStrategy is a business intelligence company, and we provide sophisticated hyper intelligence / business intelligence software tools to big enterprises. And the next step for us is to take that intelligence software and plug it into the blockchain data set and make it possible for anybody to do blockchain analytics on the Bitcoin blockchain for any purpose they might want, and then put that in the market as some kind of commercial offering. And so I think you'll see us do that. And we'll look at any other related areas where we can bring together our software assets in order to create something of commercial value in the Bitcoin world. Like people will go, oh, you like Bitcoin? Are you going to go into Bitcoin mining? Well, no, I have no expertise, no assets in mining to speak of. You're going to do Bitcoin mining, you better know energy and have a free source. You better, have a source of Bitcoin mining ASICs, and you better know how to operate a miner. And the fact that I think Bitcoin's a good idea doesn't mean I'm going to compete with the miners any more than I'm going to compete with Binance. No, I'm not an exchange. Am I going to create a bank? No, I'm not going to create a bank. I mean, am I going to create a hardware wallet? No. I mean, I think that the Bitcoin economy is just that, right? Square came out with their announcement yesterday, which was just unbelievable. They said they sold $1.7 billion worth of Bitcoin on the Square Cash application in the last 12 weeks, up by a factor of 2 quarter-over-quarter, up by a factor of 11 year-over-year. Okay, they're a mobile bank. And by the way, they're going to be mobile payment rails, and they're going to bridge all of the payment, the payment gaps the Bitcoin's blockchain doesn't solve for it. And they're going to give people a savings account in the bank of Bitcoin in one click from a mobile app. And that makes sense because they're a $90 billion market cap company with all their assets in mobile payments. So they're going to do that. And PayPal is going to do something similar. And I applaud them from doing it. And I hope the Coinbase and Binance and Kraken and the like do their thing. And, MicroStrategy is a publicly traded company. We're going to be the best publicly traded company with a Bitcoin treasury we can be. And we're going to set an example to any other publicly traded company on how you should manage your Bitcoin treasury. And hopefully people will follow us. And that's a cross I have to bear, right? I can't unbe what I am. I have 30 years in being that thing. So I want to be the best version of that thing on the Bitcoin standard that I can be. So logically, I can be an advocate. I can channel the Saylor.org to provide education. I can channel 100 million lines of business intelligence code, and I can channel it to provide intelligence, blockchain intelligence. And then I can channel MicroStrategy as a public entity, to be a great Bitcoin treasury company. And by John, that's enough.
I was going to say
that's enough. But I think that, at the end of the day, I know I have no, delusions about my place in the universe. Like if I disappear, the world will roll on without me. And if I'm 0.1% of the Bitcoin economy, that's fine. And the obvious conclusion is, at the point that Mark Zuckerberg decides to buy Bitcoin and he buys $10 billion worth of Bitcoin, he could be the TerraChad. And if Mark is the TerraChad and Jeff Bezos follows him, I'm happy to fade into the shadows and be a small footnote in the history books. There was a guy, but he's gone now because everybody knows that Mark Zuckerberg is the TerraChad that saved Bitcoin. Fine. On the day that Mark Zuckerberg says Bitcoin is built into WhatsApp and built into Facebook, I will be doing this. It'll be fine with me. And I have no delusions of grandeur. And I have no thoughts that I'm not here to fix Bitcoin. I'm not here to be the world's greatest miner. I'm not here to grab for everything I can see. The lesson that I would give to anybody starting out in business is you got to know your own limitations and take a stoic view. Just because you can do a thing doesn't mean you should do a thing. And out of 1,000 good ideas, you can probably commercialize one. And if you focus 150% on the one, and you put all your heart and your soul and your energy into that, and you bring an overwhelming amount of your assets to one thing, maybe the world will find value for you, but maybe it won't, right?
Yeah.
But your best chance is you focus all of your energy where you have all of your assets. Make your decision, set your values, channel your energy into that thing, and be happy with whatever the universe gives you. And if you fail, like if you try it and it's not working, that's kind of the world's way of saying you might want to focus more. Maybe, maybe you're not so good at that. Maybe I done a lot of things that I love. I never did anything I didn't love, but sometimes you have to give them up. Like I launched a company called alarm.com to bring home automation. It's like all these home automation things. I did it in 1999. And I loved it. I loved it. I ended up spinning it off and gave it up. It's like the child that I lost because I couldn't commercialize it. They raised an extra $250 million, went public with Goldman Sachs. They're a multi-billion-dollar publicly traded company right now. I was like, at least it would have died if I'd held it too tight. It lived, but for every one like that, there's another 6 where I loved them and they died. Because no matter how much you think it's a good idea, the world has a different view. It's a harsh world out there. And so you got to be humble in your approach to this and figure out what it is that you love so passionately that you can't let go of, that they're going to pry from your cold, dead fingers. And you channel your energy into that thing. And then you're happy.
I think that's extremely well put. And just for the record, you won't be devastated if Mark Zuckerberg becomes the bull, and someone makes a rap/dance video about him instead of just you.
I have no pride in this thing.
My couple more and I'll let you go. I wanted to ask you, a lot is made of this transition, to a Bitcoin world, hyper Bitcoinized world. And coming from the world as it is today and how perverse it is and how ingrained a lot of the systems are and how destructive they are, et cetera, et cetera. When you look at that transition, do you see it as a smooth evolution, or do you, and you could even make reference to the political dynamic right now, but what do you see when we talk about the Renaissance, when we talk about where we are now? Do you think it has to be bumpy, or it will be, or do you see this transition playing out differently than is often talked about?
I don't know how it'll happen. Maybe it'll be easy. Maybe it'll be hard. The most likely outcome is it'll be a different experience in different countries. Like it seems like it's a bit bumpier in China, right?
Yeah.
And it's a bit bumpier in Zimbabwe or Venezuela. It's going to be a different experience, and it's going to have good years and bad years. There are going to be good days. There are going to be bad days. And it's probably, there's that saying, right? How do you make the gods laugh? Make a plan.
Right.
Right. Best to keep your expectations low. Don't get too committed to one particular thing, but if you buy Bitcoin with no leverage, people are like, well, is it going to dump the thing? Well, I'm not buying it with 50x leverage or 100x leverage. If you buy it with 100x leverage and it goes down $200, you're getting wiped out. That's a problem. How about if you buy with no leverage? When you buy with no leverage and when it goes down by 90%, you're just sitting around asking yourself, is this the time to buy with whatever else I've got left? And when it gets down to 95%, you're like, well, maybe is this the point for me to go all in? Right. So if you take a long view and you're, strong hands, that meme really just refers to take a long view. Don't leverage yourself too much. By the way, the sad fact of the matter is a lot of people that dump this stuff, they don't dump it because they got leverage. They dump it because intellectually they fell in love with this low volatility future. It's like they're thinking that they've got a stop loss 5% below the market. It's like creating, plans are like putting in stop loss orders. It's like, did you ever put a stop loss order on your daughter, your son? Like, I mean, would you put a stop loss order on something you loved? I don't think so, right? So in this particular case, my view is it's Bitcoin. Do I have a better option in the world? No. Would you do it if you knew it was going to work out badly? Yeah. I mean, right? I mean, like, would you do the right thing even if you knew you were going to suffer for it one day in the distant future? Yeah, I think so. Right? What's my option? To do the wrong thing? So I don't know what'll happen. I'm not terribly concerned about it because as far as I can see, it's the only obvious choice. If you're a technologist, make a list of all of the dominant technology networks that are going to change the world that are exploding in front of our face today, this year. My list has one thing on it. Okay. If you're a technologist, it's the one thing and everything else is not so compelling. If you're an idealist, make a list of something which has a chance to make the world a better place over the course of the next decade. Work your way down that list. What's at the top of your list? I got one thing at the top of my list.
Me too, brother.
Now, there's some uncertainty there, right? I mean, they say that successful people are optimists, and I believe it. And if you look on crypto Twitter, it's like you put something out there and you get 8,000 likes or 4,000 likes, and then you get 12 people, that will call you stupid because there's a shit coin that does something better that's more quantum ray gun, immune or something. And you got to stop yourself because first of all, only 1% of the people on Twitter are posting that kind of stuff. And so if you're reacting to the people that are tagging you with that, you're reacting to the 1% that are most pessimistic, cynical, snarky, conflicted, whatever. And so that's one reason not to react to it. But the other reason, the other point is that all those people that have all that negative energy, it's debilitating to them. It's like, I won't cross the street. I might get hit by a car. I can't buy that because a quantum computer might break it. I can't do that because someone might do this. I can't do that because I can think of 1/1000th of a situation in the distant future where it might hypothetically cause you to incur some legal liability that you might hypothetically suffer for. It's like just so much negativity, and you just shouldn't dwell on it. So when I forecast out, I'm like, there's going to be volatility. Bad things going to happen. I don't know what they are. It doesn't really matter. Make your decision. I made my decision. Make yours. We need to move forward. I'm not going to freeze to death. I'm not going to cower in my basement. I'm not going to engage in behavior which is obviously morally hazardous to my health, right? I just rather have the uncertainty of the other thing.
Yeah, totally agree. And you make reference to Twitter trolls, and it seems like a bit of a secret. Because on the surface, if you just first came into Twitter and you were engaging in Bitcoin Twitter and you see all these, revved up cyber hornets all over the place. And if you happen to mention quad 4 grapes and shit or gold or whatever, they're just going to go after you. And sometimes they take heat for being, toxic and mean and nasty. And that's the secret, because you pierce that very thin veneer of, this rightly protective attitude towards this thing that we're all, dancing around, and this intellectual pursuit and this rabbit hole that we're all in, and rightly protective of that. I really, I'm a cyber hornet with the best of them on that regard. But when you connect with these people one-on-one, I know you've had the opportunity to do that a bunch in the last few months. And I've done it a ton over the last year or so. And like I said to you at the beginning, all sorts of people, you know, the well-known people and the people with 50 followers on Twitter. I'm blown away at the quality and goodness of the people that I'm engaging with in this space. I mean, like we said, I think it's partially a self-selecting sort of bias. You get into this for maybe you have a pre-existing orientation, but as we were talking about, how does Bitcoin impact that orientation? How does it kind of align or change your moral orientation? And I love everything about this space, but having the opportunity to connect with good people that, as you just articulated, they are the ones that will make the morally right decision, even if it means a more difficult, more challenging path, and it's
and just so you know, my criticism of the trolls is not the hornets. I think you should.
I know that.
If you're on the side of good and you're being constructive, I think you should be passionate and you should defend that really hard. My criticism
I know what you mean.
Is for people that are just so negative that they want to tear down something constructive just because they want to engage in sophistry.
Yeah.
Over hypotheticals.
And so hornets are the opposite. I mean, there's, as you said at the very beginning, why were this hornets so supportive of putting this together? It's because they're just so damn supportive. If you're one of them, right? If you see things a similar way. And on that point, the last two questions I have for you is from the hornets. So, Of course, a bunch of them hit me up and they were saying, can you ask Mike a couple of different things? And I think we touched on a lot of them, so I'm not going to go through them all. But one of my favorite people in the space on Twitter, his name is Gigi. He's a writer. He works at Swan Bitcoin as well, and he's recently been highlighted in 21ism, which is a art collective that launched yesterday, the 5th. Yeah, yesterday. Looking at authors and other artists and meme artists in the space and just interviewing them, showcasing their work. Just a really cool initiative. And I'm not sure if you'll be able to.
And I see his work all the time, and I think it's great.
Yeah,
he's really one of the shining lights of the entire Bitcoin community.
Yeah, and he's a phenomenal guy. Good friend. So he asked somewhat. It's a difficult question, but he is himself very deep down the rabbit hole, and we've had some really great offline discussions about the more esoteric aspects of hanging around down there. And he kind of jokingly asked me to ask you, when Mike, kind of reached the end of the rabbit hole or at its current depth, what does he see? When you go down the rabbit hole and you come back up to normal life, what was at the depth of the rabbit hole?
Immortal life. That's what I see. I see Bitcoin and a crypto network as the mechanism for all of us to achieve, if not immortality of our own lives, then immortality of our values and our will.
I love that.
That's what I see.
Another one was from the guys at Citadel 21. So this is a kind of a cultural e-zine that has been launched recently, and a lot of people from the space are featured as writers and artists. Again, it's kind of a celebration of the culture and the community. And I know Hodl or Not is one of the main driving forces behind that. And he wanted to know, do you ever write, articles about your thoughts on Bitcoin, and would you ever write a piece for them?
I have written, right? I wrote the mobile wave.
Nobody read it about Bitcoin.
Right, I mean, 50,000 people read it, maybe. But I write. Maybe I will write again when things settle down. But my experience was, it takes you a year to write. Writing an article is different, right? But writing a book takes a year and a half to get it out there. And by the time you've done it, right? Imagine what happens a year after we went down the rabbit hole here, or a year and a half. By the time you've done it, the world moved on, and most people don't read. They don't like to read. So it's a bit more challenging thing. Will I write? Yeah, maybe, perhaps. I guess what I would say here is there's so many good writers. I mean, there's so many good writers in the Bitcoin community, and you see some of the stuff that's being published online, what Dan Held and Sylvan writes on Medium every day, and
Parker and Rob and
Parker
BJ
and okay, I have no pretensions, right? That like I'm the Ernest. I don't think I'm the Ernest Hemingway of Bitcoin. Like, could I write something? Yeah. Would it be derivative to what 90% overlapping with what they've already written? Probably, right? What's my best contribution? My best contribution right now is to be a spokesman for the community as a public company officer to say this is legitimate and appropriate. And if I'm a hash function, right? Like we talk about proof of work. The first guy spends 5 years to decide to put his life savings into Bitcoin. The next person spends 3 months. I spend 1 or 2 months, and then I drop 500 million into it, which is 20 years of corporate earnings. The next person looks at me and says, "Oh, I know Mike. I trust Mike. He dropped 5," and they read like a press release, John. They read the press release, which is 20 years of earnings. The proof of work is I dropped the 500 million into the network, and then I said I did it and said why I did it. Do they need to read the book? Do they need to spend 5 years? They need to go down the rabbit hole? Do they need to, by the way, that person that's persuaded by, I'm a one-way hash function, right? I'm a hash function, right? They check my hash. They're like, okay, that guy did that. He must have had a good reason. What happens next? Well, 100 people read it. 90 don't pay attention. 8 disagree. 2 agree. And 2 drop 500 million each. And there's the next billion. Then they tell 2 people they're the hash function, right? And so my real contribution is I'm the $500 million hash function, and I'm going to explain that in an hour or 2 hours or 4 hours, or maybe I'll explain it by posting a gallery on hope.com. And by the way, if you listen to me for 8 hours and you still don't get it, right, you're not going to get it, right? Like, I invested 600 million into this thing. Here's 8 hours of me talking about it. Do you get it? Yes, no, yes. Go crack your piggy bank, take your money out, put it in the Bitcoin network, leave it there. Wait for the world to get better. Not everybody's going to agree with me, right? But I don't need everybody to agree with me. I just need anybody to agree with me, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's my view. I could write, but it's like, we're back to that issue, right? Just because you can't do a thing doesn't mean you should do a thing. I think there's a lot of great writers. I'm happy to support them. I'm happy to promote them. When I feel like there's something that needs to be written that hasn't been written by one of them, I'll think about it. But, right now, if I got an entree with the board of Twitter or the board of Square and they gave me an hour, I'd go get on the Zoom and I would tell them why they ought to put $5 billion into Bitcoin for the good of their company, for the good of the world, to save their almighty soul. And then I would answer their questions. And that's probably the best contribution I could make. Because if I showed up with a book that I'd written about it, they would just roll their eyes, right?
Yeah, and that's a hell of a contribution. So I think I think that will satisfy everyone if that's the contribution that you make. Last one, this came from another Hornet, and it was regarding the 100K mark for Bitcoin, which I guess some people are excited about that and others are less so. I tend to think that the halvings are more kind of seminal celebratory events. But in any case, you've got a yacht or yachts. The Cyber Hornets are saying, who's hosting the 100K or the 2024 halving party? And right now, you're the one that's looking the most suitable.
I've thrown some good parties in my time. I suppose I'm the right candidate to throw a good 100K party.
You're looking like it. You're looking like it right now.
Okay, John, you signed me up.
So the 100K party.
I will go on record. I will host. You
Is
can.
it hun-
I'm
is it
going
the
to point.
100K?
I will appoint you. When and if we arrive at that, I will appoint you the social chairman of the party. You figure out who's going to show up, work it out.
Boy. Oh
I
boy.
will
I'm gonna
host
be
it,
I'm gonna
and
be
it'll
getting
be
hit up
like
a
the
lot.
party of the century. Okay.
Oh damn. You're gonna get a lot of people hitting me up as a result of that, but I accept. And so is it the 100K mark or is it the 2024 halving mark? Are we going with 100K?
With the 100K.
All right. Sounds
Stick
nice.
with the 100K.
Awesome. Well, Mike, this has been super fun. It's Friday, and I'm sure you got lots of stuff to do. So I just want to thank you for the chat. It's been really nice. Places where you want to direct people that Saylor Academy, you on Twitter, anything like that?
If they want to follow me on Twitter, I'm Michael_Saylor on Twitter. And if they are interested in free education, Saylor.org. We're trying to give it away for free. We had 80,000 students show up last quarter. So I'm always interested in trying to spread education in the world. And then if they want to know more about Bitcoin and see all the curated resources we've got, hope.com. Those are three logical places.
Right.
And you want to know about my company, it's microstrategy.com. But you'll probably find all of it if you find me on Twitter.
Right. And I think the final point here, we should probably get a capacity for the party. What are we looking at here on one of these yachts?
Well, we have different places to throw the party, and I got two different
I got to
yachts.
know if I'm going to organize this thing. I got to know capacity here. This could be on us next year, Mike.
If you want a yacht party, 200 people. If you want a party in one of my homes, 1,000 people. Depends upon.
So which is it?
Depends upon your. Well, I don't know. You're gonna have to. I'm gonna leave you to duke it out with the cyber hornets to decide what they want. Although,
all right.
Although actually, it occurs to me that I could put my yacht behind my house, and you could have the both. You could have the both of the worlds.
Well, 1,200 it is.
That's probably the safest thing.
All right. Well, I'm sure there'll be lots of discussion about it on Twitter between now and then. So we'll figure it out.
Something to look forward to.
Yeah, Mike, really appreciate it. Love the stuff you're doing in the space. Keep it up, and look forward to the next time we get to speak.
Thanks for having me, John. I enjoyed it.
All right, brother. Take care.